Hello, everyone. We are live tonight. My name is Kayleen Heaton, and I'm one of the professional development specialists at the Illinois Student Assistance Commission. I'm here with my colleague.
Benny. I'm also a professional development specialist at ISAC.
And so if you have been tuning in previous weeks, what we have been doing is we have a 30-minute conversation that's really candid. We're going to talk about today's topic is going to be the Fafsa. So the Fafsa just opened on October 1st, so we're going to cover common questions on the Fafsa. We'll kind of talk a little bit about our experiences filling out the Fafsa back when we were students, before we were in the roles that we are now. But we are also trying out something slightly different with this Facebook Live video. What we are doing is we have put up, if you look on the little comment section, our ISAC College Q&A hotline. So the ISAC College Q&A hotline has a bunch of different numbers, and you'll see them here. They're also going to be listed out in that side panel, so you'll see them right over here. We are taking over this hotline for the next 30 minutes. So if you have any questions on anything that we're saying, you can feel free to text this hotline, and we are going to answer questions live while we are on the air. So yeah, any questions you have, feel free to text. Just choose the number that corresponds with the area code that you are in. And then you'll be able to text your name, text your year in school, text your name, year in school. What else does it ask?
Name of high school.
Name of high school. And then you will be signed up and able to text in your questions, and we will get to see them and we will get to answer them. But as always, if you have any questions, feel free to write comments as well. We will also be checking the comment section on Facebook as well. So without further ado, Manny, want to show them what we got here? This is the 2020-2021 FAFSA. And when is it released, Manny?
October 1st.
Yes.
And so you notice that maybe hard to see, but every year they change colors. So the very first thing I always tell students, now they're not really filling out a paper FAFSA. 99% of FAFSAs are filed on the web, but we use this so you can see it and we can show you. But even the FAFSA on the web is also color coded. And so very first thing we always tell students when completing a FAFSA is make sure you're completing the correct FAFSA. So it is the year in which they're applying for aid, not the year that they're in currently. And so it can be kind of confusing because, for example, right now if I were to complete a FAFSA, I will notice that there are two 2019-2020 FAFSA and the 2020-2021 FAFSA. So if I were a high school senior, which when I was a high school senior, that's what I did. 10 years ago, to be exact. And I completed the wrong one in part because I figured, well, it was 2008, 2009. So I figured, okay, well, it has to be this year since this is the academic year that I'm in. So I figured, let me apply for it until I was lucky because my counselor caught it pretty quickly within the week. Because I was lucky in part because I just wouldn't have known. I would have been on top of it. My parents were just like, did you fill out the FAFSA? My sister, who was in college, just told me the same thing, but she didn't give me that tip. She was just like, you completed your FAFSA? Yeah, I completed my FAFSA. And that was it until my counselor caught and asked me, like, oh, what year did you apply for it? And I was like, oh.
Yeah. And that's an excellent point. That brings us to like the very first common mistake that we see is people filling out the wrong FAFSA year. So when you are filling out your FAFSA, as Manny said, make sure that you are filling out the FAFSA for the year in which you will be in college. So like Manny said, our high school seniors, it is currently the 1920 school year, but you don't want financial aid for the 1920 school year when you're in high school. You want financial aid for the 2020-2021 school year. So you got to make sure you're filling out the 2020-2021 FAFSA because that'll be for the year in which you're in school, and that's the year that you're requesting financial aid. Another thing with that, I will say, as Manny had mentioned, we are just referencing the paper ones so that we can kind of flip through this while we're live, but there are 3 different platforms or 3 different ways that you can complete a FAFSA. One of them is if you are you prefer kind of the archaic method, the paper FAFSA, you could complete a paper FAFSA. I personally don't recommend going with the paper FAFSA. Just one excellent question, Manny, because with the paper FAFSA, I am going to see every single question that is on the FAFSA. However, when I'm completing the FAFSA, I don't need to see every single question because there's going to be some questions that just don't pertain to me. So it's kind of confusing. If you're using the paper FAFSA, it's going to tell you, if you answered no to this, skip to this question, or if you answered yes to this, be sure you're answering this question, which can kind of make it confusing because you're bouncing around. Whereas if you use FAFSA on the web, which is if you go to FAFSA, FAFSA.gov, that is where you can complete the same application, but online. If you go to FAFSA on the web, it uses something called skip logic. Do you want to kind of explain what skip logic is or what it does?
Referencing on the paper FAFSA, but it's so easy just to go question by question, because if you're someone like myself and has a sort of little bit of a history of not following directions all the time, that can happen. And you can see yourself answering each question that may not even pertain to you. So with skip logic, they're not going to ask a question that doesn't pertain to you. For example, if you indicated you were already past 24, you may notice you may not see a lot of the questions. And if, for example, if you're a female and you're filling out the FAFSA, it's not going to ask you questions on selective service. But if you're a male, it's going to ask you questions on selective service, so things like that. So it allows you to complete the FAFSA more accurately. Yes, I'd say more quickly to save a lot of time. It does take about 30 minutes or so to complete the FAFSA the first time, because you're really looking at each question and you're really thinking about it and scrambling to try and find where you can find that information. But once you know that, it's much easier sort of reference, and then you know where to look, and then it takes about 10, 15 minutes at most when you're renewing it.
Oh yeah, when you're renewing the FAFSA, it goes way quicker. So if this is your first year filling out a FAFSA, don't worry. Typically the first year tends to be the toughest because it's all brand new to you. But then, come subsequent years when you're completing your FAFSA, you'll do what's called a renewal. A lot of the fields will already be auto-populated if you're doing it online. So that's awesome. But as Manny had mentioned, yeah, FAFSA on the web, it uses skip logic, so you're only answering the questions that pertain to you. Additionally, FAFSA on the web allows you to use a feature that's called the IRS data retrieval tool. So the IRS data retrieval tool, if you want to talk about a time saver, the IRS data retrieval tool is definitely that, because if you do FAFSA on the web, and if you have filed taxes, and if you have created an FSA ID, you may be eligible to use the IRS data retrieval tool. So by using the tool, what you would do is, once you get into the section of the FAFSA where it's going to ask for tax information, it'll ask both in the student section and in the parent section, so depending on which one you're in. When it asks for tax information, if you, the student, have an FSA ID, you just enter your FSA ID in, and then you enter the address that you filed the 2018, your most latest tax return under. And then what'll happen is you can use the IRS data retrieval tool. It's going to find those taxes that are on file with the IRS and automatically input all of that data into your FAFSA. So this makes it way simpler, because A, you don't have to sit there staring at your taxes trying to manually write in the line items on your FAFSA. But B, it's also the method that colleges prefer to see. Because if you complete your FAFSA and you use the IRS data retrieval tool, it's going to reduce the likelihood that down the road your FAFSA is going to get selected for verification on tax data. So what that means is schools can see that you use the IRS data retrieval tool, so they know, okay, we don't need to worry about asking for additional documentation on the tax information, because we know these numbers that have been inputted into the FAFSA came straight from the IRS, and that the student or the parent weren't able to edit them, because if you use the tool, it blocks it out so you're not able to edit that information. And the colleges love that, because then that means they don't have to ask for additional documentation down the road during verification. So that's a great thing. What else was I going to say when I started talking about this? The platforms. And so FAFSA.gov, paper FAFSA. The last way that you can fill out your FAFSA is with an app. It's called the My Student Aid app. And on the My Student Aid app, they have the My FAFSA feature. With the My FAFSA feature, you're able to complete the FAFSA using the app. So it's up to your preference. There are a lot of different ways that you can complete your FAFSA. The FAFSA is exactly the same. It's going to ask you exactly the same questions, no matter which platform you use, but it's just a matter of kind of what you are more comfortable. We kind of tend to just recommend that if you're just starting with it, go to FAFSA.gov, because that tends to be the kind of the easiest way if you're initially doing it, and it's the most inclusive of all student situations, we think.
Now, with completing a FAFSA on the web, now Department of Education, Office of Federal Student Aid is doing a great job at synchronizing their platform. So if you were to access the FAFSA.gov on your mobile phone, desktop, laptop, tablet, it's all going to look the same. Now, this is not including the app feature. That is a My Student Aid app. That's something that's available for download and for students who are have downloaded it and maybe have completed the FAFSA through the app. And prior to the release of the 2020-2021 FAFSA, they're going to have to re-download the app so that the new FAFSA so that you can see the new FAFSA. But it's a great way because aesthetically it looks the same. I'm not sure if anyone have ever, I know that when I'm visiting a website and I'm visiting through, say, my mobile phone, the website will look much different than it does like the desktop version. And so with FAFSA.gov looking is the same aesthetically, it's a great way with that synchronizing feature. So you can pick up where you left off, going throughout different, if you want to start off on your phone, but then you want to finish on your laptop because your battery's dead, that sort of thing. So that's a great way to continue completing the FAFSA.
And the fact that they all talk to each other, you don't have to worry if you started on one feature, other than the paper FAFSA. This doesn't talk to anybody. So if you start a FAFSA on here, this isn't going to correspond with anything else. But yeah, with the app or with FAFSA.gov, you can start it on one and then move to the other, whatever you're most comfortable with. I think something too to kind of just point out while we're talking about the FAFSA today is what is on the FAFSA. I think there's a lot of kind of misconceptions about what the FAFSA asks for. The thing to know is that when you're completing the FAFSA, it's going to ask the student for student demographic information. So it's going to ask you things, name, date of birth, social security number.
Or when does that actually come up?
That's an excellent point. So that is going to be like the first thing that you do once you get to the FAFSA. That is the first part of the application is going to be the student information section. So you are going to be putting in this information, this kind of demographic stuff about yourself. Then if you're doing FAFSA on the web, the next thing it's going to ask you for is it's going to ask you to list the colleges you want the FAFSA sent to. This is really important because whatever colleges that you're thinking about, they are not going to know that you have completed a FAFSA unless you list them on your FAFSA so that it will send your results to the school. So that is another excellent question, and that is something that students tend to get concerned about. They're like, oh, well, you know, it's October 1st, I want to fill out my FAFSA, and I want to send it to ISU, but I haven't finished my application to ISU. Do I have to wait to complete my FAFSA? No, it does not matter what comes first. So if you haven't applied to a school yet, that's totally fine. Still list them on your FAFSA. Colleges do not care whether they get your FAFSA or your college application first. So just make sure that even if it's a school that you're like, I don't know if I'm going to apply, I'm just kind of thinking about it, list them on your FAFSA, because even if you end up not going there, that's fine. They're not going to pull that information unless you actually apply. And yeah, definitely do not wait to complete your FAFSA just because you haven't finished a college application. So don't worry what comes first, whether you send the FAFSA first or apply. List any schools you're considering on your FAFSA. Oh, we have our first question here. So our first question, Manny, do you want to read this one off?
If I do a FAFSA online, do I have to do it all in one sitting, or can I come back to it? That is a good question because I did mention it does take about 30 minutes. And so that is with the student and parent completing at the same time. So no, what I recommend, because students are usually, they're starting this off at school, their parents aren't available, or the school's hosting a FAFSA completion workshop. A lot of times they're hosting them in hours in which parents are still at work or commuting, going back to work. Or every parent, you know, works different shifts, different hours, but you can start it. When you go through each section, it would automatically save. But if you're going through a section and you're unsure with how to answer, I'd always say save it, go back to it, and that way you can always come back with accurate information, just to avoid any data inconsistencies or any mistakes. So that's one way. You just have to make sure you save it. If not, it always saves it with each section that you complete.
Yeah, and the save feature is at the very top hand or the very top of the screen when you're completing the FAFSA on the web. So save often. And yeah, definitely there is absolutely no harm. And if you're, you know, going through it and like Manny said, say you get through the student section, then you come to the parent section and you're like, shoot, I don't have my parent with me. I don't know how to answer this. Right. Save it, log out, and then just log right back in and you can pick up where you left off. So excellent question, Gabriella. Just giving a little shout out. Hello, Samuel Nelson. Thanks for tuning in with our Facebook Live today. I think we also had, there was that one question in Signalvine that we got sent in. It was right as we were about to start.
Understand the qualifications.
So that is another excellent question. So with the FAFSA is the application for federal student aid. Within the state of Illinois, we currently still use it to award our state aid as well. So the deadline for federal student aid it's going to be June 30th of the school year that you're requesting aid. So if I'm filling out the 2020-2021 FAFSA, the one that just opened up, because that's when I'm going to be in school, I have until June 30th of 2021 to complete my FAFSA. That is like the deadline for federal student aid. Within the state of Illinois, though, because we use this to award our state aid as well, with our state aid, our big need-based grant here in Illinois is called the MAP grant, or the Monetary Award Program grant. And that grant is based off of appropriations. So what that means is the Illinois General Assembly budgets a certain amount for that grant each year. And then once enough students have completed their FAFSA that are eligible, that meet the criteria to qualify for MAP, have filled out their FAFSAs, what that means is those funds are going to run out. So if you are an Illinois student, it is extremely important. We describe the FAFSA as first come, first served. You want to be sure you're getting it done as soon as possible after October 1st, just because once enough students that are eligible to receive that MAP grant have completed their FAFSA, those funds are going to run out. And when those funds run out, even if you may be eligible based off of your financial need for the grant, you won't be able to receive it because there are no funds left. So it's extremely important that you are filling out your FAFSA before those funds run out. Now, the question that stood was like, hey, will I get more money if I fill it out October 1st versus October 3rd? No, that's not the way it works. The amount that you would get in the MAP grant depends on your financial need. The key is just making sure that you fill out your FAFSA before those funds run out. So if my financial need, if I qualified for the full MAP grant, that amount, if I filled it out, on October 1st, that would be the amount that I qualified for, and it would be the same if I filled it out on October 3rd or October 4th or sometime later. The key is you just need to make sure you're getting your FAFSA in while those funds are still available, because if I waited super long until April or January or February or something to complete my FAFSA and those funds had already run out, even though I have the financial need to be eligible for the grant, I wouldn't be able to receive it. Hopefully that makes sense.
Right, and kind of taking it back to Gabriella's question. So if you were to start the FAFSA, say October 1st, October 2nd, and you just forgot to submit it, you forgot your parents' information, or you said, I'll get to it, days, weeks, months go by, and then all of a sudden in June, you decide, okay, you know what, I forgot, the schools have been telling me for a long time to submit my FAFSA, I'm going to submit it right now. And so if you wait too long, as Kayleen was alluding, that could really jeopardize some state aid. Now, with federal aid, you do have 18 months to apply for it and receive consideration. If you are eligible, you will receive it. Now, with state aid, as Kayleen was mentioning, is different. Now, some institutions also have particular deadlines, and they're in case if you've qualified for some money, merit-based, need-based aid, and it runs out, it runs out. And so I always tell students with a big common mistake is not applying soon enough, and parents and students always ask, well, what does soon mean? How soon do I have to complete a FAFSA? So we always say as soon as possible after October 1st. In that case, because if you submitted a FAFSA and you notice that there's a correction that needs to be made, or there's a mistake and you go back and make edits to it, you're catching that much sooner rather than later.
I also think a good thing that a lot of students, kind of a good way to gauge, finish your FAFSA before Thanksgiving. Get your FAFSA done before Thanksgiving. If you're like, but I can't fill it out this week, but when should I fill it out? Make it your goal to fill out your FAFSA before when's the 30th? November 30th? Yeah, that's Thanksgiving, right?
And families, if you want a non-controversial topic to talk about during Thanksgiving, that is talking to your high school seniors. Did you complete the FAFSA? Mm-hmm. That way, have that conversation with students to make sure that they complete if they haven't already.
Excellent. And so we'll continue to keep an eye on the comment section and the signal line as we go through. Mm-hmm. But I'll jump back into the sections of the FAFSA that I was mentioning before. We got some of those great questions. But so the first thing that you're going to answer when you're completing the FAFSA on the web is the student demographic section. Then you get into the school selection, and we discussed how you can, it doesn't matter, at what point, whether or not you've applied or not, you should put any school on the FAFSA that you are considering applying to, and you can list up to 10 at a time. If you have more than schools you want it sent, more than 10 schools that you want it sent to, that's totally fine. You'll just have to do it in batches. So you'll have to submit your FAFSA with the initial 10. Then once that FAFSA has processed, which is like 2 to 3 days, you'll be able to log back in, and then you can, take off those 10 schools and put the other 5 schools or the other however many, schools that you want it sent to. Once you get through then the what section is that? The school selection section. The next thing that happens is the dependency question. So in most cases, if you are a student that is under the age of 24, you are going to need to provide parental information on the FAFSA. There are very few limited circumstances in which a student who is under 24 years old might not need to provide parental information. It's going to be dependent on the dependency question. So like I said, there's 13 of them. They're all yes/no questions. If you are not able to answer yes to any of them, so if you're going through these questions, you're reading them and you think, nope, that doesn't apply, nope, that doesn't apply, nope, that doesn't apply, and it's all no's down the board, what that means is you're considered a dependent student, and then you will need to provide parental information. If you are able to answer yes to any one of those 13 questions, that means that you're then considered independent and you will not need to provide parental information. So once you get through that dependency section, the next section is going to depend on whether or not you were considered an independent student or a dependent student. If you're considered dependent, which again is going to be most students that are under the age of 24, you're going to need to move into the parent demographic section. So that's where it's going to ask for information about your parents. Now, a common question that we get asked is, does parent citizenship matter for federal student aid eligibility? You want to take that one, Manny?
And the answer is no.
Excellent.
So FAFSA is only concerned with the eligibility of the student.
So the student either needs to be a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen. And an eligible non-citizen would be a U.S. permanent resident, a conditional green card holder, the holder of an arrival departure record, which is an I-94 form that has one of the following designations. So it has to either say refugee, asylum granted, parolee, T visa holder, or Cuban Haitian entrant. Or if you have a letter from the Department of Health and Human Services with the designation of victim of human trafficking. That is what is considered as an eligible non-citizen. So if the student has one of those designations, or if they're a U.S. citizen, they're going to be eligible for federal student aid. If they do not, they will not be eligible for federal student aid. It only asks the student though. The parents, it does not matter what the parent citizenship status is. So if parents do not have a social security number or meet one of those criteria for eligible non-citizens, it doesn't matter. On the FAFSA, if you don't have a social security number in the parent section, you simply just put zeros in the social security section, and then you continue on. So if parents have a social, they list it in there. If they don't, they just list zeros and continue on with the application. But then once you get through the parent demographic section, you get into the parent financial information section. With the parent financial information section, it asks the exact same questions in the parent financial information section as it does in the student financial information section. So once you work through one of the financial information sections, you've seen all the finance questions that it's going to ask you. It's just going to ask the student the exact same ones. There's only one additional question in the student section that asks about any money paid or received on your behalf. But other than that, all of the questions mirror them. So once you've worked through one of the financial information sections, you've seen all the questions, there's no surprises, the student section is going to look exactly the same way. So after you get through the parent financial information section, if parents have a social security number and were able to create an FSA ID, they may be eligible to use the IRS data retrieval tool and should in that section if they are eligible. Otherwise, they can just manually input the tax data. Then you get to the student section, and if student filed taxes, they should use the IRS data retrieval tool if they're eligible. And if not, they'll just manually enter that tax information. But then you get to the, what is the final thing? Sign and submit page, and then you submit your FAFSA, and as soon as you do, you will get a confirmation page that's generated.
Page?
No, that's not all you get. That's the instant thing that you'll get. So you know that you have completed your FAFSA, and be sure. Yes, keep it for your records. And it's super important too, because like we mentioned, the FAFSA has a save function. So sometimes we'll see students that get to that last page and the signature page and they, enter their FSA IDs and they sign the FAFSA and then they hit save and they log out and they think that they did it. They're like, yeah, I'm done. We finished. I submitted. No, you actually have to hit submit. So make sure that you are hitting submit and you'll know that you hit the submit button when you get a confirmation page. So a confirmation page, it's going to tell you what your EFC or expected family contribution was. It's going to tell you what federal student aid you're eligible for. So for the Pell Grant, it's going to let you know if you qualify for any of that. Also, the direct loans from the Department of Education will let you know on that. But you will get 2 to 3 days after your FAFSA is submitted, you will get the official document, which is the student aid report, or the SAR, S-A-R. In the student aid report, it's going to contain almost the exact same information as your confirmation page, except this is like the official process version that you will get. So yeah, Manny, any common errors or anything that you think, what do you think is one of like the most common mistakes that you see with people filling out their FAFSAs?
Well, I'm actually going to go a little bit before that. The first common mistake that I see is students and parents already thinking about prior to completing a FAFSA. Well, why should I bother completing a FAFSA? Because I know I'm not going to be eligible for money. My neighbor wasn't eligible for money. There's these grants out there that I know I'm not going to qualify for. So
what's the point?
Right. And so they sort of give up arms even before applying. And you never know until you apply. Because the FAFSA is going to look at and generate what's called an expected family contribution in EFC. And what that number does is determines eligibility for federal student aid. Now, Kayleen was mentioning that ISAC, the state of Illinois, also uses the EFC to award the MAP grant that students may receive if they go to a MAP-approved school in Illinois. And so it's a great way for students to already know what need-based aid they can qualify for. And for students with the lowest EFCs can qualify for just over $11,000 of free money that they don't have to pay back.
Mm-hmm. And the only way that you're going to know what of the free money that you're eligible for from the Department of Education or from ISAC is by completing your FAFSA. You have to complete a FAFSA. That's the only way to figure out whether or not you're eligible for that. But then also, even if you absolutely are certain that, you know what, hey, I don't think we're going to qualify for that, any of those need-based grants, should I still complete a FAFSA? The answer I always say is yes, because if you want to take out any loans from the Department of Education and loans from the student loans, typically the ones from the Department of Education, these are seen as like the safest, kind of most desirable student loans. So if you're considering taking out student loans, you have to have a FAFSA on file if you want to take those loans out from the Department of Education. So you need to file a FAFSA. There's no way around it. But then additionally, if a lot of institutions say that, you know what, we want a FAFSA on file before we'll award any of our own institutional aid. So we always say not filling out a FAFSA, that's like telling a college that, you know what, it's fine, I will write a check for the entire cost of tuition and fees, I can pay for it, don't worry about it.
Because I don't know if students know what checks are.
But it's like, it's essentially telling the school, if you don't complete a FAFSA, you're saying, don't consider us for any type of financial aid, we're not interested. Because a lot of colleges, they say they want to see that a FAFSA is on file because they want to see that the student has at least attempted to dip into the state and federal sources of financial aid before they dip into their own pockets and their own institutional money. So, excuse me, super, super important. Even if you don't think you're going to be eligible for the need-based stuff, you should still be completing out a FAFSA. We say that anybody that's going to be, enrolled in school the upcoming year and that's an eligible citizen or a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen should be filing a FAFSA, regardless of whether or not you think you'll qualify for those need-based funds. So we've got like 2 or 3 more minutes here. Another, and let me know if this is one that you think too. Another thing that I always see on the FAFSA that people ask me, or kind of like a common error on the FAFSA, is when listing investments, it's going to ask you, the FAFSA asks about all of the money coming into the household and all of the money leaving the household. The FAFSA is trying to take a snapshot of the financial situation of and the student's ability to pay for college as of the day the FAFSA is submitted. So one kind of big mistake that I see a lot of people will do is it asks about, let me get the language correct, but it asks specifically, as of today, what is the net worth of your investments, including real estate? Don't include the home in which your parents live. So it asks that in the parent section. It also asks the student the same question. I see so many people unintentionally or not thinking, they will list the value of a retirement plan. The value of a retirement plan is not considered an investment for purposes of the FAFSA, so you really want to make sure that you are not listing the value of your retirement plan, if parents have that, in the investment section, because that is really, really going to spike up your EFC And that is not seen as money. The Department of Education does not look at that as money that's able to be used to pay for college, because that's intended to be for parents' retirement. So that's really important. Be sure that in the parent investment section, they are not listing the value of any 401ks, IRAs, pension funds in the investment section.
So exclude the home in which you live in for purposes of the FAFSA that is not included as an investment. I did that, or maybe it was my dad that did that. But when I first completed my FAFSA, we included that in part. So it's really important to read each question so that you understand what each question is asking. And when looking at that, make sure that you're completing the right section. So the FAFSA does a great job of listing what is the student section, what is the parent section. And so you don't want to report parents' information in the student section and vice versa. And you also don't want to accidentally put that you're married, thinking that maybe your parent section. The FAFSA does a good job of indicating that when they're asking questions, they're referring to you, the student, or yours, parents. And so it does a good job of distinguishing them. But when you're completing it, trying to get through this, it's so easy to kind of make that mistake. So make sure you're going through the appropriate section and that you're inputting the information. Now, in my case, me and my father share the same name, and going to our Social Security cards, it says the exact same thing. And so you will want to include that. You want to make sure you're putting in the right information. But I also have a nickname, and so I go by my nickname like 95% of the time. And so if you were to try to use a nickname completing your FAFSA, it's not going to match up with your federal student, your FSA ID. If you've created one, or if you're going to create one down the line while you're completing your FAFSA, it won't match, because your name on your Social Security card will say one thing versus what you're inputting on the FAFSA. So it just won't match. And so list however it is listed in your Social Security card.
And I think that's an excellent reminder to end on. Stick to your section. When you're in the FAFSA, like I said, it can be confusing. Like Manny said, it's confusing because it asks the same questions of the student as it does of the parent most of the time. So when you're going through it, if you're the student and you're looking at this and you're like, oh, it couldn't possibly be asking me about, child support paid, or it couldn't be asking me about this. Yeah, or stuff like that. It's not going to ask about mine. Make sure you're just reading the section that you're in, because it's going to ask you those financial questions just like it would your parent. So as a student, check if you're in the student section, it's asking about you. Whereas if you're in the parent section, that's when it's asking about your parent, because you don't want to be double listing your parent's information. Well, that is all of the time that we have for tonight. So thank you guys for those of you that have tuned in, and thank you for your questions. The good news is that even when we are not live, the numbers that I have left there, the ISAC College Q&A texting hotline, is an awesome resource. So even if we can't be answering it, because we only take it over when we're live on Facebook, if you have any questions after watching this, or say you're watching a recording of this, you can feel free to text that hotline and you will get a response, because it is a live person in our Deerfield office, and they will respond to any questions that come through. And if you need to, meet with someone, they can connect you with a core member. So it's an awesome resource to have. Hopefully we'll see you guys next week. And then do you have any other closing remarks or anything, Manny?
Make sure you're completing the 2020-2021 FAFSA.
Excellent. Yes. And yeah, get those FAFSAs completed. We'll see you guys next week.